Hi, friends. It's Jamie with the Badass Rebellion. Are you a woman in midlife? Have you ever wondered, is this all there is? You might not feel over the hill, so to speak, but you might be feeling incomplete, uncertain, lonely, and even invisible. Let me just say, you are not alone. Lucy, Avery, and I are here as your badass tour guides. We've been working hard all summer long, creating an awesome workshop series that we're going to be offering in October. Throughout our time together, you'll learn what's happening to you in midlife, physically, psychologically, and socially. We'll help you take stock of both where you're at and where you're not in this phase of life. You'll become clear on what matters most when it comes to reclaiming yourself, time, and relationships. And we'll have a whole lot of celebrating along the way. We'd love for you to join us. For all the details, be sure and check out our website, badassrebellion.com.
Welcome, listeners. Today we are joined by Taylor White Moffitt, who is just an incredible human being. She is a licensed clinical social worker and a yoga teacher, and she lives in Boulder, Colorado. So Taylor does all sorts of wonderful programming that we'll talk about kind of towards the end of the podcast today, but everything from a year-long embodied leadership training program to transformational retreats, a self-compassion class that she does twice a year. She teaches yoga classes. She does individual therapy, but she's just amazing. Jamie, Avery, and I have all worked with Taylor. She's an incredible mentor and teacher for us. And so she is just magnificent at really helping people live a more embodied life and helping people find more peace and ease and joy. So without further ado, let's dive into our conversation.
Welcome to Inspiration from the Couch. I'm Avery.
I'm Jamie.
And I'm Lucy. Well, welcome to Taylor White Moffitt. We're so excited to have you here today. And we just want to start with you telling everyone who you are. So give us a little background info as well as share some about what you're doing presently.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good morning, ladies and everybody. So for about 30 years, I have been a psychotherapist in Colorado. And not too long into becoming a psychotherapist, I started to feel the limitations of talking and of listening. And personally, at the same time, had a pretty significant loss in my life and began to get really interested in how movement was affecting my mental health, my nervous system, and my experiences. And so I took up a yoga practice, which about 10 years into that practice turned into teaching yoga, turned into teaching mindfulness, which turned into leading retreats and running an embodied leadership training. All to say that my experiences, mindfulness, movement, and mental health are really what helps all of us stay well and feel the vitality that I think is the birthright for each of us. That's what I do in the daytime and some of the night times. And then I'm a mom to 5 boys. Yep, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, 5. And they are my greatest teachers and my biggest difficulties. And they have taught me everything I know, mostly how to be a full feeling human, to go from very controlled and in my lane and in charge to blown open and messy and superhuman.
So you're
What
not
are the
busy.
ages?
Yeah.
Yeah, my life is definitely full. My youngest is 15 and a half, and I have my oldest biological son's 23 and my adopted son's also 23. So they range, there's about an 8-year range in those boys.
Ooh.
Yeah, we could all take a big breath in and a big breath out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you identified 3 things: mindfulness, movement, and mental health. Could you define each of those?
Sure. For me, what I love is when I started teaching yoga, I really loved yoga and I loved hiking. I loved snowboarding. I loved doing a lot of things. And I started to realize that anytime we move our body, we stir the pot. So what's really nice for me and what I love about teaching any kind of movement is that everybody gets to pick the movement that resonates in their body, right? And on Monday, it could be very cardiovascular. On Wednesday, it could be strength. And on Thursday, it could be stretching, but moving the body so that we stir the pot. Mindfulness to me is, in its simplest terms, Mary Oliver likes to say, to pay attention. This is our endless and proper work. I pretty much say that's what our mindfulness practice wants to be. And the last thing in terms of mental health is, I'd say that's a 2-part piece for me. I had a friend of mine, a psychiatrist years ago, say to me that mental health is a misnomer, that really what we have is a brain, which is an organ, very much like our kidneys, our liver, our lungs, and that we can have disruptions in the brain just like we do in other organs, right? The other piece of our mental health that's really important is the brain and the spine create a nervous system. And this nervous system is the engine, as I like to think of it, running in the backdrop. It's kind of that ticker tape band across the bottom of our news channel that's informing us about fear, exhaustion, anticipation, excitement, and learning how to tune into both the organ of our brain and our nervous system, to me, really allows us to, again, live with more vitality, more wakefulness, and just more ease.
Mm. Okay, I have a quick follow-up question about the movement part. So you talked about movement stirring the pot and allowing us to tune in. I think sometimes people use movement as a way to like disconnect, actually. So like, how do you use movement, and when is it stirring and like tuning in? And then when is movement a way to kind of like disconnect?
Great question. So I think you can eat with attention or you can eat with inattention. You can move with attention or you can move with inattention. And so what I like to teach is what I call embodiment. And another way to think about embodiment is what I would call interoception, which is to turn your awareness inside your body. So it's perhaps helping someone feel their feet on the earth. It's perhaps helping someone feel the beat of their heart. It's perhaps putting your hands on your body to notice what's the constitution of your body feel like. It's paying attention to pain. It's paying attention to heartbreak. It's turning our attention below our neck, generally speaking, to the felt somatic experiences in the body, because that's to me where a lot of the richness lies beyond this engine that runs up in our head.
Awesome. So it's almost like you have this movement, but you tie in the mindfulness because you're paying attention to like what's actually happening in your body while you're moving.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting too, because working with folks who maybe have like panic disorder or something like that, like their interoceptive awareness is really good. But the mindfulness piece to me is what feels lacking in that. Like they become engulfed by these sensations that they pay attention to all the time. So I like that distinction. And I was thinking about a podcast I was listening to the other day, and they were, I think it was Simon Sinek, and he was talking with someone, and they were talking about this quest for like wellness, like that there's a quest for wellness, but really like one of the important things, or maybe like kind of turning it on its head a little bit, is like, what about a quest for wholeness instead of wellness? And I like that you're kind of differentiating, between like what happens in the brain and what happens in the body, and the importance of the integration of the two. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do, Jamie, because there's two really important things you just shared, I think. So one of which is the quest for wellness in my mind is what I see in a lot of social media and the world today, which is how are we going to hack into the problem and solve it, right? You want 7-minute abs? Let's create 6-minute abs. You want to have peace in 7 minutes? We're going to give it to you in 5 minutes. Like you want to feel better? Take a 2-minute ice bath. That somehow we imply there's like pathology or problem that needs to be fixed, eradicated, or done with, right? And what I would say is what I have found personally powerful, and therefore what I share and teach with my students, is that we're rarely going to change those things. There's rarely nothing wrong with those things, but how we relate to them is everything. And so that feels to me the most important. And I think there's a fabulous thing happening right now for any of your listeners who follow either Peter Attia or Andrew Huberman, some of the docs out there talking about longevity and wellness and wholeness, is that feeling alive right now is all we have. And to pay attention is how we can make these little fine adjustments to not get caught up in trying to fix or change or eradicate, but actually relate to, love up, tend to those parts of us exactly as we are right now.
What makes that hard for people? Because even just the words you use, like tending to, loving up, I don't think that comes easy for most of us.
Yeah, let's start with raise your hand if you had a model for all these things. Those of you at home, I don't see any hands up, right? Like most of us did not have parents who grew up in this, right? A lot of us who are middle-aged folks had Depression era grandparents or parents. The world had very little disposable income. Like I don't think I knew what Starbucks was until I was probably a teenager. We didn't have the internet and cell phones. We had a very different experience than humans are having now. With that said, I see a trend to people paying more attention to taking more care, to destigmatizing and demystifying things like suicide and depression. And our culture is selling us the hack, right? Like Tim Ferriss was talking the other day of like how we were going to get around stress. And I was like, are we going to get around stress? And we all want it. I too, I would freaking love a hack. Could someone give me a hack for like parenting, for health, for sleep? I take a hack to anything. And my experience is rarely is there ever a hack. It's me learning to relate to the thing differently that creates more peace and ease.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you can buy into or buy any of these like particular hacks. It seems like you have to collect more things, do more things in order to like be rid of something that you're never really going to be rid of ever.
And it's such a mindset shift to kind of think about that from like this capitalism perspective. I think for me personally, like one of my big growth opportunities in midlife has been kind of coming back connected to my body and that awareness of, oh, wow, diet culture is there because of capitalism and their job is to make money. They don't really have any interest really in my health, my well-being, my peace, my ease. In fact, that's actually not what they want because that doesn't make a sale. And so there's this kind of mindset shift of like, oh, wow, what is the intention of this hack, for example? And how do and it's usually this external, for somebody else's good, and then kind of coming back to yourself, which on one hand, it's hard, right? Because you'd love for there to be a hack. You'd love for it to be fast and quick and easy. And we get sold that everything should be quick and easy and you should be able to order something and get it tomorrow. And like everything should be really fast and quick and super simple. And this stuff is, I think one thing it's part of the human experience. It's like kind of always been there and will always be there. We just have to kind of make peace with it. And I also heard you mention that kind of midlife, and that that's really where we're focusing a lot of our intention is midlife experience. We'd love to hear a little bit like, what has this phase of life been like for you personally? Like, what have you experienced? What's been hard? What's been transitional about it?
Ooh, I've never felt so my age as I feel right now. Like I feel really on this raft of beginning to usher my parents into this last chapter of their life, really ushering my younger children and even my adult children into a more powerful phase of independence in their life. And at the same time, maybe people told me and I didn't want to hear it or forgot, but this vessel that I live in has just like blown my mind with all of the things it could do and all of the difficulties and struggles it could have. And I think what I'm mostly reminded of is that all of us suffer. No one rides for free, but that when I think about things like suicide, I think, could we oversimplify it and say things like suicide are suffering in isolation? And that something like midlife is a new suffering, a different suffering. But if we can do it in community, as I see all of you creating the opportunities to be able to do it in, then the suffering is still there, but we relate to it differently because we feel seen and heard and understood. And we just even simply see an Instagram post that's like, oh, it's within the realm of normal to be sweating through my clothes. It's in the realm of normal to not know what I'm doing with my life. And I think every stage in life has its different sufferings, right? Our children would say they have their sufferings. We know 30 somethings have their sufferings. I hear my parents talk about their sufferings. And again, no one's riding for free in the big picture. And I think at midlife, my greatest comfort is like, wow, I spent so much time sweating about things. Now I'm just plain sweating, but I'm not really sweating. Now I'm just not sweating about anything anymore because I really feel like so much of the things I spent my energy and time on were so unimportant. And I think the gift of midlife for me is clarity of what matters most. And the challenge of midlife is my body has always been fairly high performing for me. And either it's tired or it's aging or it's not interested in being high performance anymore. It wants to be like, in the back of the pack. And I have to talk to my body a lot and I have to listen to my body a lot.
What do you say when you talk to it? And what does it say back?
Yeah. So one of the things I love about the trainer I work with is every time I walk into the gym, which is 3 or 4 times a week with him, and he says, like, what's your body saying this morning? So I take a moment to just listen. And sometimes my body's like, this part hurts. This part feels energized. This part feels sad, right? There's the physical sensation of pain or openness or tightness. Then there's the emotions that live in my body, right? Like when we experience pain, we don't experience that in our head. All of us experience pain in our body, and we experience feelings. That's the only other thing we don't experience in our head. We experience feelings in our body. So my body is generally consistently giving me feedback about physical sensation and emotions. And so I tend to try to be curious. And then when it's giving me feedback that I would say is not my preferred state, I do my best to meet it with kindness and care and tend to it like I would a small child or an animal. Even though I might want to rage and pound my fists on the wall, I've learned that it's just not super helpful.
What happens when you do that? When you do rage and pound your fists or judge, instead of being...
I just delay the process. Unfortunately, I do that. I'm human, of course. I do not find mindfulness in every moment. And when I literally lose my mind and I behave badly to myself or to others, I delay the process because now I have to go clean up the mess of beating myself up or not having compassion for my spouse or whatever it is. And I just, instead of a hack, I've actually just added 5 extra miles on the hike that I have to go around. And then eventually I still have to get back to the tending too. What I've learned is now I have to do a repair on top of the tending. There was what existed, and then I put all this crap on top of it. And now I've got to clean the crap up and still care for the thing and repair what happens, that I don't carry that with me via shame or irritation or whatever else might want to tag itself along for the ride.
Totally. I love what you said too about kind of feeling so your age, and kind of what I almost see there is so yourself. And one thing we found that's come up with women that we've talked to, and one thing we're kind of leaning into right now, is this idea of self-abandonment that I think happens probably for many people, but I think especially for women when they get caught up in people pleasing or tending to everyone else or caretaking or mothering. I mean, there's a lot that can come up in a lifespan that makes people abandon themselves. And I see this time as, for us individually, I think we've talked about this kind of coming back to ourselves in this midlife time. And I wonder, have you seen that come up for yourself, for the people that you work with? And what are the ways that you see people abandon themselves?
Great question, Avery. I would say generally, when I lose the capacity to be vulnerable, or I see others lose the capacity to be vulnerable, I see one of two things. We either abandon ourselves, which we were taught to do early on by the people doing the best they could. That was one of the things they gave us, or we get self-aggressive. Those are kind of our two options. Again, not my preferred options. And again, we can't hang out in vulnerability 24/7. And hopefully all of us are learning to hang out in it more, to tolerate it more, to actually create devotion around it more. And in our humanity, we're going to come up against that abandonment and self-aggression. Part of it, again, is learned in our culture. I mean, if you look at the models, I particularly look at the models for men. There's a great study done in, I think it was Oxford, that they did this in 2018. And they asked 100,000 women and 100,000 men, what qualities did they think were assigned to their gender that they needed to keep up with to feel like they belonged? And for men, that quality was anything other than weak or homosexual. And I think, yeah, that was exactly my thought. It was my solar plexus was wow. So then there's no humanity allowed, right? So you're only going to have self-abandonment and self-aggression if vulnerability is not allowed. Now, for women, of course, you'll be shocked at what we got. Use all resources to be beautiful, to be tiny and quiet. So basically what we heard from 200,000 people who self-identified as male or female in this study, that they needed to be someone other than themselves to belong, i.e. fit in. And therefore we are being socialized to abandon who we are all the time. Therefore, a lot of people I find our age don't even know who they are. People will sometimes in the first month in my office be there's my body in this room. And then there's this thing you're talking about, who I am and speaking my truth is another planet. And culturally, to belong, again, i.e. really fit in, we are taught to abandon everything that doesn't fit in the box of how the culture or our family or the school or the person across from us sees us. And we don't get a lot of validation, support, encouragement, or modeling to be authentic.
So even if we come back to a few basic definitions again, so when you talk about being vulnerable or living in our vulnerability, what does that mean for someone who may not be so familiar with how that looks or how you'd even do that?
Sure. So to me, vulnerability simply means I'm willing to be emotionally exposed. to myself, right? I have to start with like, how radically truthful can I be? Sometimes our vulnerability starts with, we don't want to look inside before we get to sharing that with anyone else, right? So it starts with the exposure of myself to myself. And then ultimately it continues to open into concentric circles in the world of how far out, how widely spread am I willing to be emotionally vulnerable.
And that's kind of like being in touch with our insides, right? And like sharing that with the world.
And I think what's powerful about it is, certainly in my world, and I would guess in the world of all of you great women, vulnerability is something people talk about often. And I would guess for your listeners and other people, I do a lot of work now in work and corporate space. It's not a word people talk about. And yet, one of the things I love in working with my leaders in the year-long leadership training is how many of them are learning that when they lead a weekly meeting, whatever the meeting is about, to start in the first 5 minutes to say, you know, many of us now are on this world of Zoom. We're coming in on two wheels. We didn't have a chance to drive here, get a coffee, go to the bathroom. Let's have a moment. Let's take a moment, right? There's a vulnerability a leader has to not just get right down to business. There's a vulnerability we have in that particular setting to not be getting it done and producing more, to actually create the inverse of that culture, is to say, let's have a moment. And I know that was taught to me by my kids' preschool teachers. They sent my kids home with this like enormous mason jar that had like a little container of glitter poured in it and water. And they taught the children at snack time that everybody got a turn during the week to shake the jar, and that they would be quiet, and that everybody would just take a moment to kind of gather themselves before the snack. And I was like, whoa, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Let's do that. Right. And so there's not a hack in that. It's actually the opposite. Is instead of cutting things out, we're slowing things down to open them up. So my experience is when people have a moment arriving on Zoom, arriving at a meal, arriving for social connection, when we have a moment, I personally speak more essentially, more thoughtfully, more grounded, more honest. If I come in on two wheels, you guys you don't want to see it. I'm like, and I'm like throwing up my day all over you. And you're like, oh, I got my own stuff, Taylor. Why are you giving me all of that?
Well, we've also talked a little bit about reckoning in our work. Like there's this reckoning that can happen in midlife. And I heard you talk a little bit about that, about this idea of being on your own raft and really being clear that, okay, this is where I am at. Here's this generation ahead of me and behind me. And this is kind of this idea of like locating yourself. And I think we've thought about reckoning as that, as kind of like almost, you know, those mall directories where it's like you are here and you're like, oh, okay, I'm trying to kind of locate myself. Like, where am I? And also kind of there's this, I think for some people, grief and loss and acceptance of like perhaps things that expectations or thoughts that they had, like beliefs that they had about where they would be, and this acceptance of like where I actually am. And so we've kind of used this word reckoning to kind of talk about that, and would love to hear about your experience with reckoning, either in your own life or with other people in midlife, this idea of what people seem to be reckoning with, and also like, how do you see that process go?
Yeah, well, I love reckoning because it reminds me that the universe starts with tapping and then knocking and then takes a wrecking ball through if we're not listening. So the reckoning is a great way to put it. And I think that's a lot of what midlife is that I certainly spent my 20s and what I would call this ladder of building, like get a career and get a partner and get a pet and get a home and get children and get furniture, and like a lot of acquiring and external validation, taking my thermometer, putting it in everybody else's mouth every day to see how I'm doing, right? And not super helpful. I wasn't very successful. And the reckoning would come when I would really put a lot of energy heading down a path that was not in alignment for me, that was not who I really am, was not really what I wanted. But I was so disconnected from who I was and what I wanted that for years I didn't even notice. Then I started to notice, then I started to get pissed off, and then I started to have a reckoning on other people. And then that eventually came back to a reckoning to me, where I had to have a lot of humility to recognize that most all of what was happening that wasn't working well was me not being myself. And I think, again, in midlife, at least for me, is I can feel the tide starting to go the other way. It's like my kids are leaving my home. I'm wanting to live in a yurt. I'm wanting to leave the country. I'm wanting to like get rid of half my clothes. And I've considered getting rid of my husband. Like there's a lot of things that I've gone through in terms of shedding that feels like I can feel myself more. Whereas in the acquiring phase, I could almost feel like this film or veil, if you will, between me and myself and me and the world. And as I'm peeling that off, I find myself so much more comfortable in my own skin. And what I find really curious about midlife is how many people feel really threatened or disrupted by that, particularly men, and how my work is how not my problem that is.
Yeah. It's that idea still of the self-abandonment of like, oh, actually, I can be myself. I don't need to abandon myself because you have a problem with it. You can have a problem and I can still do what I need to do. Yeah, those can be separate. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think an important part of that is, I mean, I assume we all want to be liked. I just kind of assume that's humanity. It's like when I come to your dinner party, well, let's just take this podcast, right? I assume that I want to be the best guest you've ever had in this podcast. I want you to hang up and be like, we need her on here all the time. Like, I want all of that. But my commitment to myself is regardless of how I'm perceived, I'm still going to be me and do it the way I need to do it, even though I would prefer that all my high school boyfriends still had a shrine up with pictures of me.
And I love that both and like I can have that preference and just acknowledge it and like not shame myself that, oh, I really shouldn't feel just like, yeah, I can feel that way and kind of hold them both, be who I am and feel that way all at the same time. I love that.
As someone who has, a 14-year-old who is very like not okay with who she is, right? I mean, it's interesting because you wonder like part of what you're feeling and experiencing and this kind of comfort in your skin, like, is this just like a hard-earned part of like getting older, or can we do it younger? Kind of similarly, when you're talking about the 20s and the 30s and acquiring, like, is that just how it has to happen where we have this layer and then we shed it eventually? Or can we like back some of this up earlier?
Yes. And like Avery was just saying, I mean, I think that, like I was mentioning earlier, perhaps someone told me what I could expect in midlife. It's like, do you remember when you were pregnant and people told you what having a teenager was like? It's actually not helpful or relevant until you have a teenager to know what it's like to have a teenager, right? There's so much going on at every stage that, again, we're always trying to hack. Like, give me the shortcuts for life. I want the plan. I want the itinerary. I want to figure it out. I want to control it. And I think, teenagers, God bless them, they have no frontal lobe. So they don't even have rational decision-making fully developed yet, right? So there's a part of teenagers, and part of, I find what's so mind-blowing about teenagers is they're completely fully grown physical adults in certain ways. Like, I have a son who's 6'3", hairy as a chia pet, just like enormous, and like a lot of self-awareness, and is just an idiotic 18-year-old all at the same time, right? And so what I can say I see that's happening differently for my kids than was certainly my experience is my kids talking to me about their fear around sexual performance, their fear around their anxiety getting in the way of doing well at school, their disappointment that friends aren't showing up for them. There is a way in which they know more about who they are, what they want, and what they need, and they can speak to it. And they're still idiotic teenagers. Like, everybody has to go through that. And I think, to your hard-earned expression, Lucy, like, adulting is the hardest thing I've ever done. I've been looking for someone to hire to do all my adulting for me, and no one's responding to that job post. It's like blowing my mind how hard it is to like hold myself and care for myself and tend for myself, and in turn do that for my family and my students and be in this world and do all the things, right? And we're certainly not going to do them all well. We're not going to do them all at the same time. That's not the goal. But there's a lot we tend to want to do. And I think as young teenagers, they have this full-time job of developing. They are still literally growing bodies and brains and neurons. And what I see differently that is giving me so much more hope that this can be less of a reckoning, let's say, at 50-something versus more of like a slide in as they continue on, a continuation, is that they're much more curious and willing, I find, and generationally speaking, to share their suffering, to ask for what they want and need, to speak to and have language for some of the pain that they live in. And I think that's going to make a huge difference in the next 10 to 20 years, especially as we continue on with things like AI and culturally where we continue to disintegrate and separate, in my humble opinion. They have a lot they're going to come up against. And so it's, thank God, so fabulous that a lot of kids in this generation are getting language and skills and tools and models and groups at school around suicide prevention and how to deal with anxiety. And I'm always amazed if you come in my waiting room and there's a bunch of teenagers, I'll be like, oh, I used to see that person, but now I see this person. I mean, they are thrilled to talk about their therapist. Whereas when I was a young person, it was like, if you went to therapy, you were like beyond being saved and helped and fixed.
So almost they're being taught something so different, right? And that some of this is like a teachable learned skill, like learning how to put words to your feelings, how to tune in and like listen to and trust yourself, asking for what you want and need. Like these are things we have to have like permission for, and then like a skill set for how to practice. And so many of us growing up, like you were saying, like that wasn't modeled and that wasn't kind of in the culture. We were kind of conditioned very differently.
Well, and I think even just voicing, I have 2 teens as well, that if they don't know what they want, if they don't know what they need, or if they don't know how they're feeling, just to be able to say that is a really great starting place rather than ignoring it and acting like it doesn't matter, or, maybe having been given, messages like my generation where, like, oh no, we don't need to identify that particular feeling or what wants or needs. You're just a teenager. I mean, so I think I agree with you, Taylor. I feel like hopefully this generation maybe is a little bit of a step ahead as far as their emotional literacy and and just being able to identify those things.
I think if you even just look at like how we talk about gender identity, it's so radically different, right, from where we came from. And this place of being able to recognize that we're all wired for feeling. We're just actually not having to learn it. We're having to unlearn the shutting it down.
All right. So if you think about all your work with humanity, what would you say, kind of 2 parts to this? Like, what do people struggle with the most? And then what do they really need?
That feels obvious to me. What I see people struggling with the most is feeling enough exactly as they are. And what I think they need the most is radical self-compassion.
So we have like one of your Taylorisms, right? So like self-compassion delivers everything that self-improvement promises. Could you share about that?
Yeah. So it's not really a Taylorism. It's really a true ripoff from Anne Lamott, because Anne Lamott likes to say that sobriety delivers everything that drinking promised. And when I read that, the first thing I thought of was that self-compassion and tending to yourself, regardless of the circumstances as you are, gives you everything you were looking for and hoping for and trying to improve. And it gives it to you right now rather than later.
Love how you could just hit the most essential language, Taylor. That is just right on the money. There's like, we're all three. This is a podcast, so you can't see us, but we're all just like nodding and like letting that settle in. It's so good.
Taylor has a gift for that, though. Taylor's good at like distilling and like, boom.
Essential language.
Boom.
Exactly.
I think that's kind of midlife for me too, is I have a lot of words. Sometimes people who love me a lot tell me kindly too many words. And yet as I get to midlife, again, I think it takes a lot of courage to say the thing, right? I look at teenagers and what do we often lump in with teenagers, rightly so. And there's protection in all those extra words. I've got a little bit of a veil between me and what I'm putting out there. And it's really scary to put things out there because people are going to give us feedback. And again, we don't live in a world where people tend to be more contemplative and compassionate and conscious and thoughtful. We're moving quickly. We're getting things done. We're checking off boxes. And so it's a lot to put ourselves out there directly. And what I find in midlife is I think every day, like, the piano could be falling from the sky today, and I want to make sure that there's nothing left unsaid. And I find the best way to do that is to be as clear, as direct, as truthful as possible.
So I want to ask you've mentioned your embodied leadership training, and I'd love for you to talk about that. Lucy and I have done that. She was cohort 1, right, Lucy? And I was 2.0. And give people a really good understanding of who it's for and what it's about. Because I think sometimes maybe people see that leadership training and think like, oh, well, if I don't work for a corporation or if I'm not running a particular organization, then this isn't for me. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So while we have C-level executives and we have CEOs, I would say more of what we have are stay-at-home moms. We have movement specialists. We have people who work in real estate. We have people who feel like they don't know themselves as much as they'd like to. They're not giving themselves or others feedback as beautifully as they'd like. They'd like more practice, power, and mastery around truth telling. They would like to be part of a community rather than just be in a little bubble, kind of doing their own little introspection. And they're ready to make a significant change or shift from, I'm going to keep trying to self improve and eradicate and beat back these things. And actually, what I really want is to develop this relationship with myself and my suffering where I can still find peace and ease, even in the hardest moments, because I have the skill set through moving my body, through mindfulness and awareness, through mental health and nervous system regulation to actually tend to, turn to, and care for myself. And then that's the person I bring everywhere, which just goes more beautifully. And we're leading with more ease because we are always leading, whether we know it or not. People are watching us at the grocery store and Target and everywhere in between. And to lead yourself in the most beautiful way leads everyone around you and inspires everyone else to do the same.
So what does the training entail? So for people who are curious.
Sure. So it's a year-long training. Our next cohort applications opened up about a month ago. It will start in February, and it starts with a 6-day retreat. And that retreat is an immersion to get to know your cohort, get to know a real sense of what's going to happen in this training. We outline what movement, what mindfulness and mental health will really look like this year. And we get you in your bodies and start having you have a training that's based on experiential rather than theory. So most leadership trainings are a lot of talking and thinking and reading, which is perfectly fine. This is about feeling, experiencing, and dropping knowledge from our heads into our body to where it becomes wisdom. From that retreat throughout the year, you have a year-long partner that you connect with. You'll have book groups. We meet as a cohort every other month for a 3-day weekend where we have a deep immersion with myself and some of the other folks in the leadership team. We have a mindfulness instructor come in. And our job is to give you every tool, every experience that's been powerful and impactful for us, in turn to hope that you can pluck out, pick and choose, and create your own toolbox of what's life-changing for you.
You're on the 4th round now. So what have you seen as some of the outcomes? Like, what do people do with this training?
2 things have surprised me the most. One of which is how connected many people have stayed in the group and in the other cohorts and getting to know each other. We're having an alumni reunion in January. Hope to see you ladies there. And I think the other piece is people's description that the most common thing I hear is, I am exactly the same person as when I started this training, and I am 200% different. And that those subtle shifts are like little firefly moments that have illuminated the sky for all these humans. And I see them leading in small, medium, and large ways, the people around them, to the point where a lot of people end up in the training because their colleague, their spouse, their friend, they saw how that person changed and they wanted that for themselves.
Powerful, powerful experience. Tell us about your other offerings. You have a few other offerings where people can find you.
I think the most obvious and primary are twice a year, I teach the art and practice of self-compassion. We're working right now to record that so it'll be permanently online and people can take it at their own self-pace. But right now it's on Zoom and in person in Colorado. And that's a 4-week course that is the skills and tools and practices, again, around movement, mindfulness, and mental health, all as it pertains to self-compassion. Someone said last year, I take it every single year because there's no better investment and no better reminder. And it's the thing that I will fight against the longest in my lifetime. So I'm going to keep taking it. So I think that's a good way to think about it, is we have a lot of unlearning to do. We have a lot of neural pathways to tear down and rebuild, and it's probably one of our toughest ones. The other offerings are that we offer transformational retreats, anywhere from 2 to 4 a year in beautiful places where we give you a chance to unplug from your life, have a focused week on you, the real practice of putting the attention on you with the guidance and support of our leadership team. And you have a community that, again, you can't recreate when you do your own retreat in your own basement. So those things feel really wonderful to get people out of their lives, into their bodies, into community, to find the vitality that's living in all of us that we're just separate from or feeling separate from.
And then you also teach yoga, right? And then people can do that virtually or in person if you're in Colorado. And I told Taylor she's ruined like everyone else for yoga because I love the way she does it.
Yeah, I teach yoga and I teach different workshops at the yoga studio. And then I have a psychotherapy practice. Essentially, everything I'm trying to do is just share with people what has saved me and continues to save me every day from feeling like a broken, fraudulent, crazy lunatic. And I don't know what you all say, but sometimes in the positions we have, people tend to think we have it all together, for lack of a better phrase. And what I try to remind people is, look, y'all come to therapy once a week, or you come to yoga once a week, or you do a retreat. I have to talk about this all day, every day, doing it 17 different ways just to keep my head sewn on. So it's, for me, a very selfish process, and it's very purpose driven. It feels like what I was put here to do. And I feel super grateful to have found it and that it's working.
Okay, so to wrap up, Taylor, so there's a lot of, we do call them Taylorisms, right? Because I will say this is what you are so powerful with, and it is that embodied practice. So 3 of us have learned from Taylor. She's taught all of us in different ways. But I think you have this gift for helping things get truly embodied and in our bodies. So I can't tell you how often like just little phrases come up in my work with clients, you know, and our work at the Badass Rebellion, where like I can just hear your voice all the time. And I think Jamie and Avery probably feel similarly. And so we have, you know, a little list of Taylorisms, but we wanted to see if you can guess like maybe 3 of the big ones that we think of with you.
Well, what you're really reminding me is that I'm such a repeater, because I obviously have said these things enough that you all got it. It's never who you're being. It's always who you're being when you do it.
Ding, ding, ding. I feel like we could be like Family Feud, right? And we just flip the board.
That was number 2 on our list. Yes, you did great.
Gosh, what else do I just repeat all the time? Oh, I don't know. You're going to have to tell me.
I'll give you a clue. It's something about your foot fetish. You've got a foot fetish.
Oh, life happens where your feet are.
Yeah, or find your feet. There's something about your feet. A lot with the feet with Taylor.
Yes. Your feet are the farthest thing in your body away from your brain. They have a lot of sensation and they do a lot of work. So a lot of us are very disconnected from our feet. And I find for me, I was just in a meeting with an attorney this week, and I always feel like I'm in trouble when I'm with an attorney, no matter what. And I was like, I just kept saying, like, press your feet on the floor, Taylor, wiggle your toes, like find your feet to stay in my body.
Yep. And then we have 2 more that we highlighted. So one is to let it all belong.
That comes from Tara Brach. And I don't know if it's exactly what she says, but it was a real game changer for me to realize my compartmentalizing practices and what a survival skill that was. And that to shift from surviving to thriving, I really needed to let everything belong.
And then one, which you talked about today, was putting your thermometer in everyone else's mouth.
Don't do it. COVID's back around. You don't want to get that COVID again. It's not good.
Stay away.
Yeah.
Anything else, Jamie, Avery, any other questions, or Taylor, anything else you want to say?
I appreciate anyone listening to your podcast is either in suffering and or looking to just thrive more. And so I'm just appreciative of what you're all offering. And I want to just remind all of your listeners that we all actually have everything we need. We are enough exactly as we are. And as we continue to turn our attention and energy inward, we start to feel the calmness we've been looking for. And I hope that that's the journey every human takes through middle age, if not earlier in their life, to find more peace and ease and joy in their experience.
Beautifully said. So where can people find you?
They can go to my website, which is humanityshared.com.
And we'll link that in the show notes.
Thank you so much. This has been amazing. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you all for having me. I'm so honored to be a guest.
Yeah. Thanks, Taylor.
Thank you for joining us for this episode.
Subscribe to Inspiration from the Couch wherever you access your podcasts.
We always welcome your feedback. Visit us on our website at inspirationfromthecouch.com.